Welcome to the Lap Podcast. This is episode 5, Papaya Rules. In this episode, we're talking how Ferrari won the Italian Grand Prix, McLaren's missed opportunities, all things technical with our expert Fenton Luong, and more. Welcome back to another episode of the Lap Podcast. This is Tristan Rines, but I've got a different voice alongside me today. We've got Fenton Luong. He's an engineer, used to build and design aero packages for UTD's racing team, correct?
Yes.
Led the internal combustion team, started the EV racing team. He's raised money for these teams. Look, in a nutshell, he's got a lot of background. He's a tech whiz. We're really happy to have him here today. So thank you for giving me this time, actually. We're following a very interesting Italian Grand Prix where Ferrari, with a really solid strategy at their home race, were able to make a one-stop strategy work to their benefit. McLaren's two-stop opened up a huge enough window for Charles Leclerc to hold on and take the flag first by 2.6 seconds over McLaren's Oscar Piastri. Even with a resurfaced grid, Ferrari stuck to their guns on this traditional one-stop. So my question to you, Fenton, is how does that graining really work, and why were Ferrari able to make it work to their advantage, at least as far as the longevity?
Yeah, absolutely. So tires are probably the most important part of any car, especially race cars, because that's your only contact patch to the ground, and that's your only form of grip towards the ground. And how teams manage graining or blistering on the tires is really tire temperature management, and that's how you load up these tires. The first and most effective way to control how much these loads on these tires are really your cambers and the toe that you guys set on your tires. For those who are new, cambers is basically, if you're looking from the side or the back end of the car, is how much that the base of the wheel flare out or flare in. And we call that the flaring out of the base to be called negative camber. And the more of that happens, the negative camber that happens, the less contact patch you guys get in the straights. But the more you guys usually get in the corner, as a car leans into a corner and it kind of eats in and it kind of settles into more of the tire, and you gain more contact patch with more load onto the tire. Sometimes it's beneficial, sometimes it's not. The bad part is when you have a lot of camber, what happens, you're putting a lot of uneven wear and heat into the inside part of the tire. Sometimes it gets too hot and you get blistering. Sometimes it gets too cold, you get graining, or any order of that nature. The second most important thing, and maybe in Formula is the most in Formula 1 is the most important thing, is the aero kind of cooling on these tires. A good case example would be when Haas was sponsored by Rich Energy, and they have like this fantastic qualifying car, but then they have this dog water car in racing.
Yeah.
When they're in races, is because they can't keep consistently these tires to a certain temperature. The tires are great on one lap pace, but they get overheated in the rears, and you can see Romain Grosjean and K-Mag kind of just complaining about the rears just not being stable. And when you don't have enough cooling on these tires, you get graining and or blistering. And so Ferrari being able to keep their one-stop strategy is really an expert tire management with temperature, the temperature tire management. So they probably got a really good suspension setup. For Monza is their home track, of course they should.
Yeah.
And also they have a good understanding of their aero and how it affects their tires. So they did a fantastic job managing that.
Mm-hmm. So Ferrari are able to succeed understanding the track, and even with a resurfaced, layout for Monza. Do you think that home court advantage really helped them with the understanding versus their rivals? Like everybody else, it seemed on the grid, we're going to that two-stop, right? So you're talking about how the graining and the blistering and how their suspension setup, if I'm not mistaken, like they were able to basically work with that contact patch, correct? Mm-hmm. What would you think as far as like why the rest of the field struggled so heavily with it? I mean, is it just as simple as like, well, they didn't quite understand the layout, or is it?
It's a mixture of both, really. I guess for Ferrari, I would be embarrassed if I were to lose my home home track.
I mean, it happens, you know.
Yeah, it happens, you know. Sometimes it does, right?
Yeah.
But there's obviously a lot of emphasis for Ferrari to win that Italian GP, and so they probably put that extra effort into kind of studying the track, having as much information over that track as possible. Maybe sometimes more than the competitors, just because they put that extra engineer time in there. The second thing is,
so, I was gonna say, so like, do you think it might have been something where because everybody else is kind of looking at the track or doesn't have quite the maybe the savviness with that track, that's why they were like, let's play a safety net here and just do this two-stop strategy?
Yeah, I think so. And then the second thing, well, I think the other one was that that Ferrari, more than anything, probably banked a lot on their upgrade package or how they did their downforce package. Really like tuned in for this track probably more than the rest of the competitors. For them, winning a home race is a whole lot more.
I'm guessing you've probably seen the pictures of Leclerc on the podium and just seeing the sea of Tifosi out on the grid.
Absolutely. I've seen that one. Very happy for them.
Yeah. I mean, even Mercedes said this after the race, like, no matter what your team, what your country, goosebumps every time. Congratulations to our friends at Ferrari for the win. Like, when Ferrari wins, especially in front of the Tifosi, I mean, it's a great weekend for racing in general.
Absolutely.
I think everybody gets happy.
Historic.
But is this a win that, I wouldn't say it's hollow or anything of that nature. I mean, a win is a win is a win. But McLaren botching it, is that a little bit more of an emphasis here?
I think so.
Okay.
I think great job to Ferrari for this, but McLaren had every chance to win, and they had I believe Lando to get on pole on this track. So obviously they have a quick car. From previous stints and previous races, they've shown that this car can not only sustain, not only have these fast lap times, but also sustain these fast lap times very well. So obviously, either they don't have a full understanding of the car, which leads them to that two-stop strategy, and a failure of capitalizing on how fast their car truly is, or B, there's something else that they haven't taken into account yet that Ferrari probably did beyond the technical side.
I mean, we've seen the last couple race weekends, like even at Zandvoort, when Ferrari hadn't brought any like significant upgrade package, they had really, really, really strong race pace. I think they finished like 4-5, they finished 3-4 at Zandvoort, and now obviously getting the 1-4 here in Monza. When you talked about this a little bit earlier with like Haas, how their qualifying laps were super hot, they were great, but then when it comes to race pace, obviously like there's a disconnect there. What leads it to work inversely, right? Where your race pace is so much stronger? Is it just like what are the major differences you would see from a car?
It's definitely like setup, and setup is a huge thing where you play this fine line on what type of setup you want. I believe the USGP about a year, maybe two ago, with Aston Martin kind of opting out, or one of the teams opting to run a slower quality pace to hopefully have a bigger race pace.
Okay.
Just because the car is really sensitive to selecting one or the other, and the car probably bias race pace greater. And this is how, when you try to choose one or the other, it's just really set up for aero, set up for tires, conservation of tires. Maybe the car's more efficient but not very fast, and so you set up for this hyper efficiency, lose out on qualifying, but you would use less gas, so that means you can push harder for longer. Tires don't have to go, they don't burn through the tires as much, so they can go hold this longer stint of this faster race pace without having to worry too much. So this is how teams kind of choose which one they want to go for.
So, and to bring it back onto McLaren, do you think there was just is it more of a strategy on the pit wall side, or you mentioned like how maybe they just don't understand their car? I hope they understand their car considering how quick it is. I mean, they've consistently brought great upgrades since, I want to say Austria, last year. They've continued to find time, and now they're in a position where, they're probably going to take this constructors, right? But the misunderstanding of the car within a situation like this, they pit Oscar, if I'm not mistaken, at lap like 39, right? Which eventually forfeited the race lead to Leclerc, and then Sainz in that 1-2. They were able to eventually overtake Sainz to get back the 2-3, but missing out on that potential win once again. Where do you think the misunderstanding comes in for McLaren's side? Is it just like a track-specific situation, or is it just maybe like an overall pit wall, foundational, like an experience factor?
I think to a certain extent, I can't pin on anything, but
Yeah.
I'd say if I was McLaren and I would have a good understanding of my car, it's probably the resurfacing that got me.
Yeah.
And maybe McLaren played on the safe side of the resurfacing and believed that with the resurfacing, the tire deg is just much higher than they probably saw in the actual races, and from there on that led to bad strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Probably. Second one is probably you have to accommodate for driver botches, right? So Lando Norris botching his pole position as always.
Yeah.
And
it's his curse, man.
It's his curse, but you probably have to change different strategies to accommodate to try to get that back, and that could probably Lando's driving could be a little more aggressive, and that led to higher deg than usual.
I mean, his teammate certainly is plenty aggressive.
Yeah, any aggressive, I'll tell you that. But that could lead to that two-stopper that probably wasn't good for them.
Mm-hmm. I mean, from where I sit, which is a lot less technical and more of just, hey, like I'm watching the cars go around, right? But I try to understand a little bit more. I would say that maybe, and again, this is just my opinion, I think there is kind of a fundamental, maybe an experience factor here when it comes to McLaren, right? Where they've lost a number of races this year. I would argue they've had the opportunity to win at Canada, Spain, Austria, Great Britain, Hungary, for Lando's title hopes anyway, Belgium, and now Italy once again. They've cost themselves a lot of races this season, a number of opportunities to potentially not just take this constructors and leaps and bounds and run away with it, but potentially put Lando Norris in an opportunity to actually properly fight against Max Verstappen for the Drivers' Championship. That's where I think the experience factor comes in. I don't think they ever expected to be here, right?
I think to a certain point, yeah. I don't think so. Last year compared to this year, right? This year is just fantastic for them.
Yeah.
But
they haven't taken any steps backwards.
Yeah, they haven't taken any steps backwards, but you gotta I wouldn't be too hard on McLaren. First, inexperience of like, hey, maybe I didn't expect this result and this kind of high, and these mistakes are okay to have because overall we're having this high,
sure,
this amazing car. But engineers at the end of the day, we're making as best of an educated guess as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we don't make the best educated guess. Either we're A, ill-informed, or B, until hindsight's 2020. Oh, we saw this, but we didn't, attribute this to anything more than just maybe just, some noise in the data, and we should just ignore it. And later on, we find out that's actually true. And so, some engineers will take, risks one way, and some engineers will take risks the other way. And so, it may lead us to different solutions. Most of them are suboptimal, but one team will have the least suboptimal solution. So I wouldn't say don't be too harsh on these decisions. Racing is racing. It's all unpredictable. Today's track that you've analyzed and you kind of carved out the surfaces and you figured out what the friction coefficient of the track is today might be very different tomorrow, and you will never know. Right?
Mm-hmm.
When sand blows into the track and fills in all these voids, it could change the frictional coefficient of it, and you will never know.
Mm-hmm.
So you may account for one thing, hyper optimize for one thing, and it turns out to be slightly different, and that could cost you the race. You would never know that.
I just think about and look, obviously I don't have quite the background you have. This is just like an opinion coming through, but I just figure after a while, though, you look at the loss, you look at the number of losses or the missed opportunities for McLaren, and you start to eventually fill in those. Okay, well, this didn't work then. This didn't work here. Like, how many opportunities can you really give yourself that much leniency on?
Yeah.
And it's a result-driven sport. At the end of the day, when you're costing yourself the top step a number of times, right, and even surrendering the top step from Lando's perspective to Oscar in Hungary just to be a good teammate and then not see that reward come back to you.
That's
right?
A rough one.
Like, are you learning from your mistakes? If you're Lando Norris, you watched your teammate just blitz past you in lap 1 this past weekend, right?
Mm-hmm.
I find McLaren are making a lot of these mistakes that I don't remember seeing from Red Bull, right? They're on top of their strategy, on top of having the best car, on top of having the best driver, right?
Yeah.
They were locked in, keyed in. Watching last year, it was boring if it's boring if you're looking for somebody else to win, but you also have to respect the game and go, dude, they didn't lose more than one race last year. They just had everything locked in and keyed in.
Yeah.
I think maybe that's where the experience factor comes back, right? Where they've won a couple titles in a row, going for their third, and they just happen to have everything line up super well.
Yeah.
Versus McLaren, though, obviously in taking these strides moving forward, beyond even just losing races this season, it's the fashion in which they're losing. And I think that's more, I come in and I'm like, I'm frustrated to watch somebody just so, I wouldn't say so wholly incompetent, but just forfeiting opportunities.
Yeah, I can see that.
Right?
Frustrating for sure.
Yeah. Lando is obviously incredibly talented. On one lap, I think he's faster than Oscar. I think the data shows that. But if you're McLaren and you're trying to win not just this constructors battle, I think that where the other frustration comes in is there's a real opportunity for Lando to pull out more points, right? Like, why wouldn't you want to switch your drivers for that 2-3 to give one of your drivers a little bit more of a fighting chance to take that championship later in the season, especially when Red Bull were on the back foot?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this comes to a kind of driver's mindset. Drivers are very, very, very selfish, and they ought to be.
Yeah. And you spent some time driving.
I spent some time driving, and even is rare, and this is where we praise drivers whenever they think for the team. Rip Felipe Massa for always thinking for the team.
Sure.
But he's not obligated, or Piastri is not obligated to return that favor back.
Mm-hmm.
Albeit until the team strictly orders him to be back. Lando qualified higher. He already should have, I guess, have that into his hands, right? That he should be in front of Oscar Piastri at the first lap and throughout the whole race, but he didn't capitalize on that. And since he didn't, and Oscar did, fully in Oscar's own doing, that he did better than Lando, they can't say too much back. He's earned that result.
But I guess the pushback from that position is you look at what happened in Hungary, where the team was so hard on Lando, so very publicly during that race, where Lando was pulling away and putting in fastest laps to relinquish the race win, then with the idea that, hey, this is going to come back to you, right? The idea is, we see that you're fighting for a championship. We are fighting as a championship for these championships as a team, but to not see that come back to him.
I think that's definitely McLaren's fault. That other one is McLaren's humongous botch up.
Yeah.
On I believe strategy, right? And this one is less so. I guess they both have botched strategies. I think in the Italian Grand Prix, I think Piastri earned his way into the spot. I think. I guess McLaren was too afraid to do this. To do it
backwards, basically.
Yeah, basically to do it backwards. They already got bad publicity once.
Yeah.
And they're already on the hot seat.
But it would have been an understanding, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like, you have this is where I, like, from my looking at my notes, this is what I effectively wrote down, was obviously Oscar doesn't care. Like, it's not Oscar's interest for his teammate to necessarily do better than him, but you can at least still have the accomplishment of, like, understanding at the end of that day, look, I still got to do what's best for the team. And if it's in the team's best interest to try to win both titles, not just one, having both is a huge accomplishment. It's not necessarily the onus of Oscar to relinquish opportunities, but what is a second place to him versus a race win? If it was a race win, I completely understand, like, maybe Oscar doesn't want to quite return that favor. But Lando gave you that favor. It's a 2-point difference. For Oscar, whether the trophy is a little bit taller or a little bit shorter from second and third place, I don't think he cares about. So that's where, like, the fundamental McLaren botch comes in. Mm-hmm. I think they've effectively started ruining chemistry between these two drivers that, they do seem to play nice, when you see them outside the grid, they do all the social media stuff, and they do all the press conferences, and they look like they're good buddies, right? But on track, Oscar is mentored by Mark Webber, who spent all those years being the sidekick to Sebastian Vettel, whether he liked it or not. being put into that position.
Maybe he's projecting onto Oscar.
Exactly. So I think maybe that's where maybe McLaren were scared to even come onto Oscar and ask him to relinquish that second place, where it starts to get stressful, where maybe there's a clause in his contract, right?
Yeah.
I've seen a couple people speculate on that, but if you're Lando Norris, I feel the worst for him. Because you have an opportunity here. Drivers' championship opportunities don't come around every single day. Next year, when the slate starts at 0, for all we know, Ferrari are going to come in with a rocket ship, and they've got Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc, and Mercedes have got this young kid we're going to talk about later coming in next to George Russell, and Mercedes have a long history of good development, and Red Bull aren't wholly incompetent. They're just becoming slower, right? Which we'll talk about here in a few moments, but this might be Lando's only opportunity if you think about it. I know it's a little bit more of an immediate future.
Yeah, but it's a fair one to look at that, right? I guess another blast in the past is Braun GP having this one amazing car that Jenson Button won his driver's title in, and that's his only time he ever won his driver title.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's very real to Lando. I feel bad for him. I think he should have spoken up then.
Yeah.
To me, I'm not too informed to this, but if that's the situation, yes. Albeit maybe Lando is more understanding. Maybe he's more patient. Right? All we know, he's probably a lot more patient. Be like, you know what, whatever. I'll just make up the results the next time, and maybe he doesn't speak up, or maybe he did speak up, but internally.
I just see the next time being, look, we've got 8 races left. And we've got a number of different winners so far this year. Now Charles has multiple wins. Lewis has multiple wins. Lando has multiple wins. Max has multiple wins. Yeah. Right. The opportunities are, it's a lot tougher to win these days than it was, maybe last year if you're just Max Verstappen. But it's a lot tougher to win these days just because there's so much real competition from a strategy standpoint as well as a performance standpoint. I think the onus does kind of come into Lando, though, to mic into the team and go, hey, are we going to switch? Yeah. Because he put in a fastest lap at the end of the race on older tires. So it's not like the pace was completely lost for Lando. Yeah. But 2 more points into Max Verstappen's lead. I believe the lead it's definitely less than 100 points, looking at the driver's standings. He's got 241 to Max's 303. I know 2 points might sound like, oh, who cares? But when you're coming down to Abu Dhabi for every result, to kind of just, unify all at once, these laps are what matter the most at the end of the season. 2 more points could very well make that title yours or Max's, right? Yeah. In the interest of the team, I guess more or less my opinion, I think, maybe this is where Lando comes back and goes, yo, I gave him 1, he needs to give me 1. Yeah. And I'm not even asking for the win here. I'm just asking for second place. Yeah. So I think that maybe there's more of an emphasis as far as this is where the botches come in for McLaren, and they do start to mount. Or if you are Lando, maybe you shouldn't have given it over in Hungary, because now you see what your teammate is unwilling to do for you, right? To take your position on lap 1, turn 1, and keep your curse alive, right?
Unfortunate, but yes.
Yeah. But I don't want to spend all of the podcast talking about the unfortunate McLaren botches. I mean, if Kevin were here, he's actually a noted McLaren fan. He would maybe have a little bit of conjecture. But I want to move on to Red Bull because they had a notable weekend for all the wrong reasons. They were the 4th fastest team this weekend. Max is watching this 4th title in a row slowly look more and more in peril as Red Bull's struggles are continuing. Verstappen hasn't won a race since the Spanish Grand Prix. He's lost the Italian Grand Prix this weekend he lost this weekend by 38 seconds. There's a lot of criticism post-race from Max's side in regards to how he was fed information from his race engineers, and at times also saying, what are we doing, basically? At that moment, both championships are not realistic, he said to Autosport on Instagram, if I'm not mistaken. Not the power, not the speed, not the pit stop we wanted. We have to work hard to turn it around. And then Christian Horner even apologized for the performance of the car this weekend. Max is also saying, look, we just need to change the whole car. So there's obviously a tantamount of frustration coming from this side. The car development going completely awry ever since Miami. And there's an interesting note about Miami. There was a re-emphasis on some braking rules coming out of that Grand Prix or going into that Grand Prix weekend. Red Bull have since won at least a couple of races, but it looks like the car has slowly gotten further and further away from them. I want to talk about this emphasis on the rear brake splitter. This is where your technical background's going to come in, so I'm very excited to hear your thoughts on this. I've got a couple of diagrams pulled up for the listening audience here.
So for the ill-informed about how the G-sensitive like T-splitter works at the Red Bull car is basically as you're braking into the car, or actually braking into a corner, you want your inside tire, the tire that's pointing towards the corner or into the corner already, or closer towards the corner side, to really to be slower than the tires on the outside, because you really want to maximize that turning potential in the car. And to do so, you have to slow down the right side of the car more than your left side of the car. So how you would do this in real life, or in just racing in general, is that you slow down as much as you can. You trail brake yourself out, right? As or at least you maximize your braking potential in the straight line. You trail brake out. As you trail braking out, your differential will kind of, or hopefully your differential would do your job, right? Which your outside tire will be faster than your inside tire. But that only comes to a certain limit. Beyond that, to kind of bias or get harder into that difference, you have to slow down your inside tire more or increase your outside tire faster, right? How Red Bull did this is that they imagine a T, and there's a little ball that's being held by springs on either side. And this T holds brake fluid. And every time you press on your brakes, it pushes brake fluid from the bottom of the T to the outside of the T. So if you're braking, in a straight line, the ball in the center stays in the center. And the fluids get split evenly between your left wheel and your right wheel. But when you're in a corner and you're pressing the brakes, the ball will close off more of the fluid on the outside wheel and allow more fluid to go in the inside wheel, henceforth braking or slowing down the inside wheel a lot more. And this helps you kind of rotate the car harder and harder, allow you to take in corners harder and harder, and you can go for later braking and not worrying about the car maybe getting out of your hand, because you can still force that rotation out of that car. And when you're designing a car and you have that design from ground up, with that system kind of playing a lot in the factor of vehicle dynamics and saying that, hey, this is what my car is going to do transiently, and you design the rest of the system, the suspension, the aero to work in accordance to that, and that gets taken away from you. And that's one of your few core system that works in your car. You have to fill in the gap somewhere, right? You've taken one of 5 things that make the car great.
And before we move forward, I want to understand, so what does this system do? Like, so you're explaining like where the fluids and whatnot go. As far as like just a simple system, the re-emphasis from the rules from the FIA was to take away, I believe it's an automatic version of this, where the drivers now have to do this manually. So there's a lot, it's basically adding layers of more complexity to a braking system, correct?
So, the automated version of this is that spring technically automates this. The driver doesn't have to think. You get your spring rate right, to match your cornering G. There's a lot of math that goes behind it, of course. Then yes, the driver doesn't have to think. You just tune in these springs for every racetrack, and hence be it the car behavior that you want. But now if the driver has to do this manually,
so taking away this post Miami, you were mentioning before I stopped you, was now they've effectively don't understand their car anymore, because they have a very core piece of their system that just doesn't operate the way it was intended to anymore, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So over the course of the season, though, with progressive upgrades to try to counteract this, and then just it looks like Red Bull have kind of hit their development ceiling, correct?
And it's been noted early on in the season that I think Adrian Newey, I'm not sure if Adrian Newey or one of the technical guys that talked about Red Bull having a very small ceiling of development, but it's pretty much showing that, hey, we've reached our limit of how far we can develop this car before we just play the game of compromise. And so like you can adjust suspension to an aero to do one thing or another, to bias one track or another, but you can't really make your car faster than if you just revert the wings and revert the tuning back to where it was. You're just now henceforth tuning that car to certain tracks.
Or you're either just throwing stuff at the wall to see maybe we find a breakthrough almost.
And this is where you get the flow viz and you're like, like, okay, maybe I'm not understanding where this is going. Maybe there's some stuff in the wind tunnel that's not being captured that maybe I can capture in race. Playing the FlowViz game, however, gives away a lot to your competitors.
Okay. Yeah, explain that a little bit. I'm curious.
Yeah, where Formula One is heavily aero dominated, aero first before suspension.
Yeah, which is why Adrian knew he's a wizard, right?
He is truly a wizard. We'll talk about that later, but yeah, how you manage turbulence is so important. Turbulence either can make you or break you in this kind of like high level aerodynamics development. You do turbulence wrong and you get turbulent streams or vortices to where you don't want it to be at, which is usually the low pressure region where it's creating downforce. What happens is that you're disturbing that and you're breaking you're breaking the flow, right? So you're making dirty the air, and no longer are you creating that low pressure region that you hope for. You do it right, you seal it, and you double down on the downforce. A good example would be, hey, I'm turning into a corner, right? The left side of my car, or if I'm turning to a left corner, the left side of my car raises a little higher than my right. Suspension heaves over, right, towards one side. That means that air has a higher opportunity to seep in through one side, losing downforce. If you do your turbulence management wrong, right, and you do your floor sealing wrong with turbulence, you're screwed. You lose that downforce. And how teams would...
And does that start to play into porpoising a little bit that we've seen?
Yes, that can play to porpoising, but it plays really into mid-corner.
Okay.
Mid-corner, and this is where it's the most sensitive, mid-corner, like, sensitivity and kind of that driver confidence, right? They're like, oh man, I don't know what the car is doing because it's probably losing a whole heck of a lot of downforce and they're just too sensitive to the car. So back to the FlowViz question now.
Yeah.
It's where teams can only speculate, but teams really would understand if you play the FlowViz game and you're like, screw it, I'm gonna have to FlowViz my car. Every team's frothing over their mouth to figure out, hey, where's that turbulence really going? Is it going to the side pods? Is it going down under the side pods? Is it into the brake cooling area, the rear brake cooling area? Is it going into the beam wing in the back, right? They really want to know. And how you manage that, you're giving that secret away.
Yeah, so, which is why we see a ton of it probably towards like the beginning of the year when everybody's still trying to kind of fundamentally understand their car, maybe, versus you would be kind of alarmed to see it probably at this stage of the season, I'm guessing.
You wouldn't be alarmed, but once you see it, you kind of know, you kind of can tell that, hey, you're either hitting a wall or this is for next season.
Okay.
And you're kind of giving up development this season.
Okay. And as far as like Red Bull are concerned specifically, I mean, they've hit that ceiling is what it looks like. It almost seems like they're throwing stuff at the wall, whether it's like trying a different shoulder structure on the back end of the car. I'm imagining like they had like a very conservative, very like simple shouldering, and then you saw like almost the Mercedes Boulder shoulder get installed within this weekend as well. How does the shouldering, I guess, kind of affect like it increases downforce to have more weight on the back end, or like how does that dynamic kind of work?
That shouldering affects cooling of the engine, right? More of that bolstering, meaning more of the rear end gets opened up, right, at the back to affect cooling. The other thing is kind of managing that airflow to where you want to go. So if you, let's just say if it looks like a toad to me, like more like the Mario, Super Mario, you have the toad hat. The head is bigger than the body. Sure. And so where the airflow is how you want to adjust it. So if you want to adjust more of the airflow to go down with the bouldering, the shoulder boulder, sure, from Mercedes, you can force it down towards more of the beam wing. And maybe it helps you with extraction of the diffuser at the rear. Okay. Right. If you want to have a more Coke bottle shape or whatever, and nearing the back, you're less worried about that and more worried about drag. The less of that surface area that you can get in the high pressure region, the better, preferably, without, of course, breaking your flow. Or how you want to manage that air into your wing, or how you want to cool your car and your brake system. That rear, as the air comes rearward and rearward, what happens is that it affects the rest of the system more and more. To the hotter system too. So where you probably want to manage more and more, the air density is less. It's probably more sensitive to this sort of thing.
Okay. And there was another thing that I noticed both from McLaren and Red Bull over this weekend, where they were basically taking like bites out of the front and rear wings. Like how to, it basically looked like they just took a saw and just like cut it out. Yeah. Like, so was that, I guess, like how does the airflow work with that in comparison to where the front wings have kind of gone more recently, right?
Yeah,
where just taking those major slices out, I guess, for like just straight line speed.
Yeah,
effect.
and where they decide to cut and where they decide to leave is where the turbulence kind of roll over. I'll give you for the ill-informed on how downforce works is it's basically one side is a vacuum and the other side is high pressure. And high pressure usually rolls over to the low pressure region whenever there's no more wall blocking it. And so what happens is that if you have a wing, downforce the front wing, and let's say you make a big cut nearing the middle of the nose, right? Mm-hmm. But then nearing the end you flick up, for example. What happens is that the nearing the edge of your front wing, you're gonna create this high pressure, and it's gonna roll in to where you've cut your front wing near the top, and it's gonna roll in and create that vortice. Mm-hmm. Maybe back in the days closer to like the Y250 vortice that you kind of see in the front wing of previous cars. But
okay.
you kind of make that vortice, maybe it goes through between the front control arm and the body, or through the front control arm and into the side pod or into the diffuser, or the intake of the diffuser, right? Or however you want to manage that turbulence. But how they want to do that is effectively managing their downforce and their drag.
Okay.
So they're very strategic with that cut, but it's very personalized to that car and car's characteristic behavior further down. Whatever the front wing does, it's so critical to what the rest of the car does.
Yeah.
They have to work with the outwash of that, or the the pipeline, the downpipe of that.
Sure.
That issue.
Sure. And we probably won't see, I imagine we probably won't see that kind of setup again until maybe like Vegas, just because of like the long, super long straights there as well.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. So, but as far as like Red Bull, and I guess to kind of leave it off on here is, do you think the departure, I guess, of Newey, which we can use to kind of leapfrog here, do you think the departure of Newey at that earlier stage of the season is partially why Red Bull have hit the ceiling so hard?
I would say no. As much as Adrian Newey is probably one of the greatest, if not the greatest, F1 designer to ever graced Formula One, mm-hmm. There are a lot of other smart engineers. He can only provide a lot of insight to what the core characteristic or what he believes that the direction of the team is going. But he also could have influenced this car to hopefully, or have this kind of tight ceiling. And hopefully that's enough to take constructors immediately first and have that big, huge step, and then to have that tiny window of like, maybe I can improve the car more. Whereas, and he's rather taking that risk, other engineers later on, like McLaren or whatever, will start out with a slow car, but they have a huge window of opportunity to upgrade their car. And if they have enough funds and if they work quick enough, maybe like McLaren now, get their car to be the fastest car early on. Mm-hmm. With the departure of Newey, probably the rest of the team is just dealing with Newey's decision. And Newey's decision may be good, may have been not, right? Mm-hmm. But it was a calculated risk, and sometimes he calculated wrong.
Sure. And speaking of Adrian Newey, it looks like we're getting closer to a confirmation of him going to Aston Martin. Apparently a very lucrative deal. There's been a lot of murmurs creeping out, apparently ahead of, not of course this upcoming weekend, but next weekend's Azerbaijan Grand Prix. I guess we're expecting some kind of announcement that's official. As far as Newey coming into Aston Martin, at least with the final year of these regulations, then creeping into 2026, the way I understand it, there's a decent amount of carryover from this current regulation outside of a couple of major components. But as far as like ground effect is concerned, there's a lot of carryover. How much of an influence would Adrian Newey have to next season, and then potentially looking forward to 2026? I guess in a more specific frame, does Adrian Newey make Aston Martin like a legit contender immediately within the final year of this regulation? Or is that more of a, we're going to really see that influence in 2026 kind of thing?
Probably in 2026. They brought in Dan Fallows, I believe, from Red Bull.
Okay.
And he made his splash, right? And then with that, Dan Fallow's splash, first initially it was a great car, and then it kind of died off. And maybe with Adrian Newey, we might have another spike again. But with improper facilities and or maybe improper management and maybe there's some internal politics and egos or whatever, maybe he wouldn't have as much of a splash as you think he would. He probably would guide the car to be more consistent. And that's more fundamental engineering that will make the car either A, behave consistently one way or the other. To chase for peaks or for higher consistency beyond that, you've really got to chase for the final like 5%, 2%. And that's maybe up to Aston Martin's new wind tunnel and new facilities. And maybe with those new facilities and new wind tunnel, Adrian Newey, there's a chance that Adrian Newey can really double down on the car's development. We would never know. But what we can know is at least hopefully he can get Aston Martin's car to be more consistent. Right now we're seeing a huge discrepancy between either Fernando Alonso, making the Aston Martin mega of a car, and then Lance Stroll being
Lance Stroll
in 17th place, or with the more recent way of how they're doing the car, they're sacrificing Alonso's way of driving and Alonso's basically car in favor for a more consistent car for both of them again.
Okay.
Maybe with introduction of Adrian Newey, they will have a better baseline of a car.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there on, it's up to the rest of the engineers to kind of figure out how to chase the last 5% again.
Sure. I think you and I agree. Like maybe 2025 isn't. You're not going to see them become. Oh, they're a world champion all of a sudden. Like it's one of those deals where if you can get Newey within the next rule set, I believe, in going into 2026 with the decent amount of carryover that does exist within Formula One. Obviously, we're going away with like the DRS. We're not going to have that anymore, right? The engine system itself is completely changing, but still having like ground effect and aerodynamics still being a major player, of course, in Formula One. I think Newey's still going to be very instrumental, but next year we're not going to see Alonso stepping onto the top step of the podium every weekend. No. It's not going to be that snap change of a turnaround that I think the flash of that news is going to present. I think taking a more conservative approach, absolutely. Maybe the expectations for 2025. Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Maybe we can see them fourth fastest, right?
And
consistently,
which would be huge.
Yeah, but also consistently fourth fastest, which is going to be even more of a big news. Consistency is usually the key factor of seeing if a constructor's car, they have an understanding of their car very well. If you're seeing a lot of peaky performance, that means they don't really understand the car.
Okay, like what would be maybe a good example this year? Would you say like maybe Mercedes, as far as like they're still kind of peaking, but they're not quite, their value doesn't seem that low?
Yeah, it could be that. I guess, again, back in the Haas, I like dogging on Haas.
Sure.
Of like not until much later on, they figure out why their car was behaving so inconsistently, where they have like amazing qualifying and just terrible races, right? Or they're like Alpine, like early on, maybe last season, to where it'll be like a decently qualifying car and then an absolute dog water of a car in races, right? Or the vice versa. I don't remember which way it is.
Sure. But like a lot of the midfielders, kind of.
Yeah, midfielders, or like Sauber.
Or like Williams last year. They had a lot of peak performances where they were top 10. Alex Albon was putting together these amazing weekends.
Maybe that's a low down or a low drag car. That could be a trick
maybe
to track. But when you just see like random like spikes of like, hey, they're doing great in high downforce track and sometimes low downforce, that's when you're kind of figuring out, okay, they don't really know what's going on. They're striking lucky. And they're striking lucky enough to where they're like, wow, they're happy. But not until you see a consistent car and consistently performing okay is when you can say that, okay, they probably have a good understanding of their car. They probably just don't have a good understanding of where to go next.
Sure. And when you're like one of those lower field teams, unfortunately, the resources probably aren't quite as big as a Ferrari or a Red Bull, McLaren, Mercedes, right?
Yeah, so hopefully Aston Martin.
And hopefully Aston Martin. But you kind of see that development ceiling hit, maybe from an infrastructure level. That's where we've seen guys like James Vowles come in and say, this is a project. This is not going to be an immediate turnaround. We don't expect to be winning races. We expect to be more competitive beginning in 2026.
Yeah, and that's a very good way of doing good engineering, good project management, is to do that.
Is to just understand it's a gradual. It's not going to be. Yeah. There's nothing that changes overnight. I mean,
absolutely, it can't.
Especially not in Formula One. I mean, it's a long process. I mean, McLaren, again, we talked about this earlier in the podcast, going from P19, P20 at Bahrain at the beginning of last season to now winning races. the fundamental complete overhaul of that car around Austria last year, and ever since then it's been a legit contender. But these things take time. It's not immediate. But speaking of things that, maybe not quite as consistent, but a pedestrian weekend for Mercedes. I'm a Mercedes fan. I've talked about it a couple times, but I had some high hopes. I even predicted them winning this weekend because the characteristics they displayed heading into higher speed weekends, right? The car looks a lot more in tune when it came to like Belgium, right, where they were able to snag like a 1-2 before the disqualification. Sad.
Must have hurt, huh?
It hurts a little bit, but it's just the truth, right? They were kind of lucky in Austin, but then some good strategy as well as like a really good setup in Great Britain, right? Winning at Silverstone. There's a lot of high speed there too. So I figured walking into this weekend, maybe Mercedes were going to be fighting for a win. Not quite. I think it was a pedestrian weekend. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this. I mean, George starting in P3 and then having that lap 1 turn 1 mistake, kind of being pushed off because of the McLaren, battling, dropping him back, and then the front wing getting messed up, and then him losing a bunch of positions. They kind of just met in the middle. P5, P7 finish for Mercedes. Anything notable about that? It just wasn't quite their weekend.
Not their weekend. Driver had some bad luck, right? If they started at P3 and they didn't have any mistakes, probably kept P3, or maybe just drop back down like 1 or 2 positions at most. But yeah, nothing of note other than oops.
Yeah, but we do have a new driver on the grid.
Woo-hoo.
Franco Colapinto.
Yes, sir.
For Williams. Logan Sargent's replacement, to the chagrin of all the American fans.
No, where's my eagle? What's a kilometer?
Freedom has left. But Colapinto had a pretty solid weekend. Yeah. He finished P12, had a quiet, good start to his Formula One career, finished just 13 seconds behind Alex Albon, which I would say that's still pretty impressive as far as your first race.
I think it's an improvement. As much as I felt really bad for Logan, I don't think he was made for the sport. At least for Colapinto, he's more adjusted to that sport some way. And I think for Colapinto to come in here with no Formula One experience other than maybe some free practices, or much less than Logan Sargent, and to come in, 13 seconds. You said 13
seconds? About 13 seconds from Albon.
From Albon is fantastic. If he can keep this consistently and learn from Alex Albon on how to consistently bring home points safely, not go running into the grass when it's wet.
Yeah.
I think he's gonna have just a fantastic time. I think he's gonna have a good long career.
Yeah.
Maybe not in
maybe not in the immediate future though, because they got signs coming in next year as well. Yeah. So do you? This was my theory. Is they're basically trying him out to be their reserve driver for the future, which it's not quite as sexy as, of course, being on the grid, but you're gonna get 8 to 9 opportunities, to display talent to other Formula One teams as well within this season.
Yeah. And for Williams, it's a fantastic safety net, right? Let's just say Sainz gets wooed by Audi hopefully future Audi away from Williams after just like 1 or 2 seasons, right? They definitely know who they're gonna choose, and they're gonna have Colapinto in that seat. Unless some other constructors like, I'm gonna pay you a stupid amount of money to get this kid into your seat, right? Yeah. But I definitely would take Colapinto into that seat. He's solid. He's showing he's solid. And Williams also have a bargaining chip against Sainz. Now, Sainz may ask for a longer contract and whatever, but if his performance is pretty similar to Alex Albon.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, if Alex Albon and his career is he's being more aggressive and arrogant about his seat at Williams, they don't want to be dealing with that heat, right? They probably would just take Colapinto and be like, here's a up-and-coming fantastic driver. Let's invest some resources in him. Let's get him a long contract. And let's see this kid grow into something that we believe is probably better for us than Sainz. If Sainz underperforms. That's if
Sainz does all those drama things.
Yeah, if the Sainz does all the drama things. Some drivers, after coming from Ferrari, Fernando Alonso, into a lesser team, they usually bring that arrogance or that higher expectation to that team. Or even if they drop their expectation, they still would probably be underwhelmed by a team that used to be ran off by Excel sheets, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, Williams have been trying to rebuild from an infrastructural level for quite a while now. So, I mean, I hope that Sainz completely understands what he's getting himself into. I think he does. I don't think considering how long he took to make that decision anyway, I can't imagine that he's walking in going like, look, we're going to be a world champion driver next year. Like, no. This team is you're going to probably finish like P18, 17 next year at number of times. Like, just you have to be comfortable with like not being comfortable.
Yeah.
Speaking of some of the teams a little bit further back, you love dogging on these boys.
Absolutely, dude.
Haas's K-Mag. Kevin Magnussen is going to be banned for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, collecting his 12th penalty point after what was it? He ran into Pierre Gasly.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
Stupid.
So we're not going to see K-Mag back on the grid, but he'll have a completely refreshed slate for the final 7 races of the season when he does come back.
Forehead, dude. He's an absolute forehead.
Even Gasly, post-race and seeing that decision come down, was willing to go and say, look, like he was just racy. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's just part of the sport. But how do you feel about this decision from the FIA?
I think it's perfectly just.
Yeah.
Seeing how he was such an aggressive driver just throughout his whole career, he earned this. He earned this 110%. My boy K-Mag is getting K. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Just because he's
You don't think he's going to be on the grid next year?
No, crazy. But more than anything, you got this much experience now, right? You cannot be making these rash decisions with your car, like power diving into another car like this. You got so much years of experience. You're on a team that finances are still iffy, right?
Yeah.
And even with MoneyGram as your sponsor, still kind of not the greatest, right? So why are you risking so much? Right?
Sure.
You've got plenty of time. You still got many laps to reel in Gasly, but you choose to just dive bomb him. You think you're Ricardo? What's going on here, man? So I think it's immaturity. I think it's impatience.
Sure.
And I think with his previous records of brake checking folks, of just absolutely like throwing folks into a corner and forcing them like to just eat grass. Right, this is a long time coming.
So you mean to tell me that you're not Kevin Magnussen's biggest fan? Is that what I'm hearing? He's not. You don't have portraits of Kevin Magnussen hanging around the house.
Such a grimy driver, dude. I think he would do great in IndyCar.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in IndyCar, roughing and toughening in IndyCar is a lot more accepted than in Formula One.
Do you think you think that's where he ends up next year?
Most likely.
Yeah.
If not,
him and Logan Sargent.
If not, I'll see him in rally.
Rally? Ooh, that'd be interesting.
He's a Dane, right?
Yes.
They're pretty good at rallying, I think.
Okay. I mean, this does give us an opportunity to see Ollie Behrman on the grid again this year, though.
Love that kid.
So Ollie's going to be driving alongside Nico Hülkenberg for the next race weekend in Baku. What do you think is going to, I guess, like make a prediction, right? Yeah. Like how do you feel like that weekend is going to go for Ollie?
I think it's going to be a safe weekend for Ollie. I think he's already proven himself at that Ferrari seat when he had to substitute in for Sainz.
Getting that P7 in Jeddah. Yeah.
If he is smart as a kid, he wouldn't try to outperform Hülkenberg.
I don't think you could. I mean, he's Hülkenberg's been killing it in qualifying this year. He's had a couple P6 finishes this year, so
keep it, man. Yeah. But Behrman, if he's smart, I think if I would guess where Haas is sitting at, he's probably in the P14, P16 range. So if he can just sit within that range, plus or minus 3 places from Hülkenberg, he'll be all right.
Yeah.
If he can get the car safe, get it within a place with Hülkenberg, fantastic.
That's a fantastic weekend.
That's a fantastic weekend.
I think I'd agree. I mean, Ollie coming up from Prema, who've also seen another one of their drivers get signed too, which we'll talk about next. I think if Ollie can, I don't know that I don't want to overestimate, because Haas have had the odd weekend where they've put the car in the points, right? Yeah. I mean, like a P9, P10. But that's Nico Hülkenberg. And Magnussen, I believe, scored 1 point even in Monza.
What a dog.
He's a beast. But I think it would be a little bit overambitious to say Yeah, let's expect Ollie Behrman to get points this weekend.
No, absolutely. I think that's just that's not a smart thing.
Yeah, but he's going to get at least a little more comfortable within the structure of the team because he is going to be driving for them for the next few years.
I think it's Ocon going to be in Haas, right?
Him and Ocon.
I am going to be frank. I am also a Ocon hater. And I just think he's also such a dirty, like overly competitive driver with kind of not too much skill to show that he's worth all of that.
Do you think that's where the sponsors and stuff kind of come in and maybe they play a factor?
Yeah, and if he's gonna bring too much trouble to Haas, Behrman might come in and swoop in, right? Or if Hülkenberg gets swooped in by Audi.
Well, he has, yeah. He signed with Sauber and then moving forward for the next few years.
I'm so behind. I'm living in a rock, dude. And they got that open seat or whatever with either Ocon or whatever that happens to be. Get Ollie to be in there, and hopefully Ollie shows that he's a team player. He's obviously shown that he's really fast. He's shown that he's pretty polite as a kid.
Yeah.
Shown at least a good sportsman. So I have higher hopes than Ocon. With Ocon.
So you're definitely gonna have a favorite next year. Got it,
dude. I hate that dude. I'm on this tangent real quick. Actually, I'm here to dog on my boys even more. Fernando Alonso fought off Hamilton like a fucking tiger.
Okay.
He is. I remember what's that Alpine versus Mercedes, that legendary defending like there's no tomorrow. Right? He's defending the homeland out here, right? Fighting for his life, right? Pushing Hamilton every inch that he can get out of that, just so that Ocon can get that win, right? I think.
Yeah, at Hungary.
Ocon didn't even last one lap holding back for Alonso whenever he needed it. Dude, what is this? And not only that, as when Alonso was in Alpine with Ocon, man, Ocon was so dirty. Just so dirty with him. It's like, why are you pushing this man who's a 2-time world champion off the track, dude?
Yeah.
Like, get real and get right. You are somewhat associated with Mercedes. You'll never get the Mercedes seat, right?
Yeah.
And now you're acting like you're hot shot because you technically got more points than Alonso. No, bro, eat dust, bro. Eat dust and hope you eat a lot of it.
So what we're learning here is that you have been the president of the Esteban Ocon hater club.
Absolutely, dude. I'm a hater through and through. K-Mag and Ocon needs to go, bro.
We are running a little bit short on time, but I wanted to talk about this real quick. Hard transition over. Kimi Antonelli being named to the Mercedes seat. Any quick thoughts on that?
Congrats. I think Toto, you know how Toto really wanted Max Verstappen.
Sure.
And I think he's kind of projecting, and he's like, I'm never gonna lose another high quality driver ever again, and I'm gonna have Kimi no matter what.
Yeah.
I think it's brazen. I think if he was smart, he'd sign Sainz or some other more experienced driver for at least one season.
See, but there was that talk. They did propose a one-on-one, 1 year, team option 1+1 with Sainz, if I'm not mistaken, but Sainz didn't want that.
Yeah,
he didn't want to be the seat filler.
Yeah, but there's other, I guess more better options, right? There's Drugovich.
You think Felipe Drugovich is better than Kimi?
I wouldn't say better, but I think he would be less aggressive or try to prove himself because he's older, much older. I think Drugovich was a fantastic F2 driver. He's shown a good pace in F1 seat, in F1 machinery, right? I think they could have at least asked, hey, we'll find a really good reserve driver. We'll get Kimi to just fully focus on F2 for now. Right, or whatever, just get him really warmed up to his initial and maybe one more year F2, right? Just get him in and let him learn racecraft in a much faster Formula car before we get him in there. They've got a lot of risk putting in Kimi. I hope he's worth all the hype.
I think they definitely understand the risk. I mean, obviously he crashed in FP1, right? That was he put the car on top, first position with his first lap, and it was very exciting and held it for a little bit, and then second push lap, put it into the wall, lost it around turn 11, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But I've been watching the kid all year. I mean, I'm very excited, personally. Yeah. I think Kimi's super rapid. I think he's very fast. I think it's from Mercedes, from a foundational standpoint, they understand what they're getting here. This is a project. This is not a finished product from day one. We're not getting, we're not getting Max on year 7, right, with Kimi Antonelli. Red Bull had to take their time with Max too, and now Max is a champion. So that's how I think that Mercedes are looking at Kimi, rather than, I think they probably would have liked to put him in a Williams, potentially, but Williams have been very vocal in saying, look, we're not going to be the Mercedes B team. So, you guys figured out yourselves. With Max obviously not leaving Red Bull, that kind of left Toto in a position of, well, we love this kid. We think he's rapid. We think he's fast. We think that we have a really bright future with him as a potential, great teammate with George if George decides to stick around for a long time. But Kimi's our guy for the future, basically.
Yeah.
Whether it's starting somewhere else and coming here or otherwise, I feel really good about the signing. After watching him this season, I see how quick and how, yes, very aggressive, but the kid can win, even in a Prema that isn't quite optimal for Formula 2 this year. The talent is there. I'm incredibly excited. Any quick notes on the standings before we get out of here? Any thoughts, predictions as we move forward through the rest of the season?
I think at this pace, Max is going to win driver championship.
Yeah.
McLaren's going to probably win constructors. If McLaren gets their head out of their booty cheeks, maybe they have a chance.
Maybe Lando has a chance to win both.
I hope he has the chance to win both.
Yeah.
The kid's good.
I think the overall community of Formula One wants to see it be really competitive. It's just up to McLaren to stop hesitating.
Yeah.
Right? And do it. Just not botch it, man. I keep coming back to the word botch, but the Papaya rules thing coming in at the very end here. I know that's what we're gonna call this episode, but I mean them racing alongside each other. McLaren have a lot of questions they still have to answer. So we'll see how the rest of the season goes. I still think McLaren, of course, are gonna win the actual constructors. I think they have it by Austin, in my opinion.
Sure.
I don't know that Lando quite has it to win the drivers, though. I think it's gonna come down to Abu Dhabi, where it's gonna be really close, but Max is just going to have a solid enough weekend to keep that at bay.
Most likely.
That's my prediction with 8 races to go.
Right.
We've broken an hour. We've gone so much longer than I expected to. Thank you so much for your time today, Fenton. We'd love to have you back in the future, of course. Technical whiz, break it down for us dummies down here on the ground floor. But we really, 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 really appreciate your time. So thank you so much. We're going to have you back here again, hopefully in the future. Next week, Kevin Walker should be back alongside me here, Tristan, Rines in studio. We're going to catch you all next week. Thank you so much for listening. This has been the Lap Podcast, Episode 5, Papaya Rules.